Tyler Durden from Fight Club versus Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
There are a lot of elements of Kaczynski that are hyper-masculine.
Do they share the same beliefs? Are they terrorists? Or are they freedom fighters? First, let's take a look at the philosophy of Dr. Theodore Kaczynski. In the late 90s, the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski was terrorizing America, conducting a series of bombings around the country spanning over 2 decades. Kaczynski did so with one goal in mind: get rid of the industrial system by any means necessary.
I was going to work at getting back the system.
But why did Kaczynski want to destroy the quote-unquote system? Well, Kaczynski correctly pointed out that you and I are completely reliant on the industrial system to survive. And when you think about it, if you rely on something for your survival, that means you are not free. But let's backtrack for a second. What does Kaczynski mean by the industrial system? Kaczynski posits that this industrial system that you and I rely on and are essentially slaves to is characterized by a few things, and first and foremost is a technological dependency. Kaczynski argued that modern industrial society is heavily reliant on complex technologies for production, communication, and just daily living. This dependency has led to a loss of freedom and self-sufficiency among individuals, as well as increased vulnerability should there ever be disruptions to this system. And Kaczynski's not wrong. The COVID-19 pandemic was the closest we came in the modern era to the system being shut down. And it showed just how reliant on it we really are. When the pandemic first hit and panic set in, people bought out the stores on things like baby formula, food, and oddly enough, toilet paper. In lieu of these vulnerabilities, Kaczynski's solution was a return to nature. Kaczynski loved nature and argued that because of technology and our dependency on it, we can no longer function in the primitive world in which our bodies and brains were designed for. Kaczynski does have a point. Let's say that COVID actually did shut down the entire system. If the grocery stores shut their doors and your heating was turned off, how many of us are genuinely capable of hunting for food or starting a fire from scratch? Kaczynski, on the other hand, was a survivalist. He spent most of his adult life living in a cabin in rural Montana, a cabin that had no running water or electricity, and hunting rabbits to survive. On the topic of nature, furthermore, Kaczynski had great disdain for the industrial system because of its unsustainable exploitation of our environment. The functioning of the industrial system relies heavily on the extraction and processing of Earth's natural resources. Kaczynski warned that continued reliance and exploitation by industrial practices will lead to ecological collapse and irreparable harm to our planet. Kaczynski also had it in for the elites, condemning the centralization of power. Kaczynski again correctly pointed out that the industrial system concentrates power in the hands of large institutions, elites, and governments and corporations, all of whom control the decisions and the means of production and distribution. If we go for fully electric cars, what happens when the government decides to shut off the power? If we're all reliant on Starlink for Wi-Fi, what happens if Elon Musk is having a bad day? These were not concerns for Kaczynski. With no car, no electricity, no job, and nothing really to do but obsess over the ills of society, Kaczynski devised a plan to disrupt the system. He was going to bomb and kill prominent people participating in its facilitation. And he did. He sent a total of 16 bombs, killed 3 people, and injured 23. Lastly, Kaczynski also argued that the industrial system leads to alienation and discontent among people. Kaczynski said that technology fosters this sense of alienation and dissatisfaction. It motivates people in the pursuit of material wealth at the expense of meaningful human connections or otherwise genuine fulfillment. This is the perfect point to move on to Tyler Durden, aka the narrator. Our narrator is a byproduct of Kaczynski's worst fears, an alienated and discontented man who is merely a gear in the dehumanizing corporate machine. This alienation and discontentment has manifested in the form of an alternate personality, one Tyler Durden. Much like Kacynski, Tyler Durden despised the system and the elites who run it. But whereas Kacynski despised industry and technology, Durden really despised the consumer aspect of the system. He believed corporate America was reducing people to envious, consumer-driven slaves working jobs they hate so they can buy stuff they don't need. Tyler's solution to this, just like Kaczynski's, was primitivism.
In the world I see, you're stalking out through the damp canyon forest around the ruins of Rockefeller Center. You'll wear leather clothes that will last you the rest of your life. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Sears Tower. And when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn, laying strips of venison in the empty carpool lane of some abandoned superhighway.
Like Kaczynski, Tyler lived in a remote area away from people in an isolated and, ironically, industrial part of town. Despite living in this industrial area, Tyler was also a bit of a survivalist. At his Paper Street mansion, he had Project Mayhem members grooming gardens in preparation to take his people off the grid. Furthermore, like Kaczynski, Tyler was also an explosive and bomb aficionado. And like Kaczynski, Tyler engaged in terrorism, mostly petty pranks to disrupt consumer culture, before he ultimately devised a plan to bomb the credit card buildings and render his desired primitivistic world, a world free of consumer culture and freeing people from debt which has ultimately turned them into slaves. So how do these men stack up against one another? Well, both despise the system and instead advocate for a return to primitivism. Both were terrorists, devising schemes to disrupt and get back at the system. Both utilized homemade bombs and homemade explosives. And oddly enough, both had a hatred and dislike for women.
In my opinion, he hated women. He had no use for us.
I'm wondering if another woman is really the answer we need.
No doubt both figures are cult icons. People even wanted Kaczynski to run for president. And no doubt a lot of people find both figures inspirational. But in my opinion, we should not glorify these men. Of course, the current system is not perfect, and it never will be. It'll never be perfect because the system will always reflect human beings, and human beings are not perfect. We don't get it right every time. But thousands of years of human evolution have led to this system, a system that allows many average people to live like kings of the past. Everyone calls for the primitive world until they're stuck in it. The primitive world was hostile, godless, dangerous, and tyrannical. Furthermore, history has shown that early life, particularly in the Middle Ages, was rather boring and mundane. Remember that Kaczynski committed suicide. He bombed planes with innocent people. He had no job and lived off of his parents. I think one thing I've learned from writing this essay is that intelligence and loneliness is a recipe for disaster. I think community and love could have helped Kaczynski and saved people. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for watching. Consider supporting the channel, and I'll see you soon.